Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Welcome back to another episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? This is part 7, and this week's box office was dominated once again by Barbie and Oppenheimer. We'll begin this week once again with a minuscule update for one of our contestants that definitely appears to now be out of the box office worldwide. So let's have a big round of applause for the entry from Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios, that completely underperforming superhero movie The Flash, starring everyone's favorite wackadoodle actor Ezra Miller. While the movie did not earn anything internationally, it did play in 152 theaters in the US until Friday, when it was replaced by 2 other newly opening movies. So both domestically and globally, the movie earned another roughly $153,000, bringing its final domestic total up to $107.7 million. So while the movie's international total remains at $160.4 million, its global total rose slightly to $268.1 million, which is its final global gross box office revenue. Hence, there is nothing to project for the movie moving forward. But the movie's estimated break-even point range is $550 million to $660 million, which is based on multiplying its $220 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. Thus, the movie's final global gross box office loss ranges between $281.9 million to $391.9 million. Dividing that range by 2 yields a range of possible loss for Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios of $140.9 million to $195.9 million. So once again, these are formidable numbers that, for now, will place The Flash into first place, but it won't remain there for long. That brings us to 2 movies that opened last weekend that once again adversely impacted all of the other contestants. So let's have a warm welcome for the movies Barbie and Oppenheimer. While we don't normally talk about financially successful movies on Who Will Be the Biggest Flop, both of these movies are exceptions due to how much box office money they are siphoning away from all of our contestants. For its second weekend, Barbie earned another $93 million, which was only a 40% drop from its opening weekend, to bring its current domestic total up to $351.4 million. And that means that the movie did not have an average weekly drop. It actually had a weekly gain of 26.71%. Internationally, the movie earned another $241 million to bring its international total up to $423.1 million, which was also not a weekly drop, but a weekly gain of 32.47%. Globally, the movie earned another $437.5 million to bring its current global gross box office up to $774.5 million, which was also not a weekly drop, but a weekly gain of 29.82%. So the movie has broken even because its break-even point is $590 million, which is 2 times the sum of its $145 million production budget and its $150 million marketing budget, in order to take into account the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves. Domestically, Oppenheimer also had a fantastic weekend at the box office by earning another $46.2 million, which was a drop of 42.61%, to bring its current domestic total up to $174.1 million. And that actually gives the movie a domestic weekly gain of 16.22%. Internationally, the movie earned another $132.7 million to bring its international total up to $226.3 million, which was also not a weekly drop, but a weekly gain of 41.66%. Globally, the movie earned another $226.2 million to bring its current global box office total up to $400.4 million, which was also not a weekly drop, but a weekly gain of 29.9%. And that means that just like Barbie, Oppenheimer has also broken even this weekend. So let's have a congratulatory round of applause for both movies, because each has greatly benefited from the fact that many moviegoers are choosing to see them together as a double feature. And that's definitely not a common occurrence. But now it's time to move on to our next and newest contestant, which came from Disney. So please give a warm welcome for the very poorly timed remake Haunted Mansion, which stars Rosario Dawson and was directed by Justin Simien. After having talked about this movie in my previous video, the movie failed to achieve the expected predicted domestic opening weekend box office of $25 million to $30 million by only earning $24.2 million domestically. Internationally, the movie only managed to earn a practically non-existent $9.1 million, which is extremely sad and pathetic. So that brings its global opening weekend box office up to $33.3 million, and that's barely scratching the surface, given that its production budget is $157.8 million, which means that its estimated break-even point ranges between 2.5 to 3.0 times that, or $394.5 million to $473.4 million. If I project the movie's box office forward using a possible average weekly drop ranging between 30 to 40%, then the movie may only earn somewhere between $83.2 million to $110.8 million in global gross box office revenue. And not only is that nowhere near the movie's estimated break-even point range, it's not even more than its production budget. Thus, the movie is currently looking to lose anywhere between $283.7 million to $390.2 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when we divide by 2, means that Disney is looking to lose somewhere between $141.8 million to $195.1 million, which puts the movie into a very close second place immediately behind The Flash. So please give a warm welcome to our third contestant that was in 5th place in this weekend's domestic box office overall. The entry from Paramount Studios, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, starring Tom Cruise. Domestically, the movie only managed to earn another $10.7 million to bring its domestic box office total up to $139.2 million. Internationally, the movie did a lot better, earning $55.9 million to bring its international total up to $308 million. Globally, the movie earned another $76.4 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $447.2 million. But unfortunately, since the movie has a $290 million production budget, when we multiply that by 2.5 and 3.0 to calculate a mid and upper range estimated break-even point range, we get values of $725 million and $870 million respectively. So thanks in part to the Barbenheimer effect, using the movie's current average weekly drop of 42.99%, and one standard deviation above and below based on the previous 6 films in the franchise, we get projected possible final global gross box office values of $529.2 million, $548.5 million, and $573 million, which, as this chart shows, are well below the movie's estimated break-even point range. So right now, the movie is looking at possibly losing as much as $152 million to $340.8 million in global gross box office revenue. And when we divide that range by 2, it looks like Paramount Pictures could lose somewhere between $76 million to $170.4 million, which puts Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 in 3rd place behind The Flash and Haunted Mansion. And that brings us to our 4th contestant, which dropped to 7th place overall in this weekend's domestic box office. So let's have a warm welcome for Kathleen Kennedy's truly terrible entry from Disney and LucasFilm, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, starring the 81-year-old Harrison Ford. The movie only took in a rather pathetic $4 million domestically, which brings its domestic box office total up to $167.1 million. Internationally, the movie brought in another $13 million to bring its international box office total up to $189 million. So globally, the movie earned another $21.1 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $356.1 million. So when we project that forward by using the movie's current average weekly drop of 34.66% and one standard deviation above and below, as well as two standard deviations above, we get a projected final global gross box office range for Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction between $389.3 million to $399.5 million. So Kathleen Kennedy must be crying her little bloodshot eyes out right now, because in addition to the likelihood that the movie won't even crack $400 million globally, the movie also has an estimated break-even point range of $736.8 million to $884.1 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's bloated production budget of $294.7 million by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively. Thus, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction currently stands to lose somewhere between $337.2 million to $494.8 million in global gross box office revenue. So dividing that range by 2 yields an updated possible range of losses for Disney and Lucasfilm of $168.6 million to $247.4 million, which once again places Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction back into first place, as it has been since it opened several weeks ago. This moves The Flash into second place, Haunted Mansion into third place, and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 into fourth place. And that brings us to our fifth contestant, whose domestic box office earnings landed it in 8th position overall. So let's have a warm welcome for the entry from Disney Pixar, the animated movie Elemental. The movie earned another $3.4 million domestically to bring its domestic box office total up to $145 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $30.6 million to bring its international box office up to $250 million. Globally, the movie earned another $38.3 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $395 million. Projecting forward, using the overall Pixar movie average weekly drop of 28.4% and one standard deviation above and below, yields a possible final global gross box office range of $457.3 million to $550.1 million. So there's still a distinct possibility that Elemental could break even, since its estimated break-even point is $500 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5. Thus, Elemental currently stands to lose anywhere from $0 to $42.7 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2, means that Disney Pixar may lose anywhere from $0 to $21.4 million. And this places Elemental firmly into last place. This is also the last appearance for Elemental in Who Will Be the Biggest Flop, due to the fact that its current earnings and likely projections mean that it doesn't have a chance of possibly winning the coveted Biggest Flop title, even if it doesn't disqualify itself. And this brings us to our 6th contestant, which came in 14th place overall in this weekend's domestic box office. So let's have a warm welcome for the entry from Paramount Pictures and Hasbro, Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. The movie earned another $355,000 at the domestic box office to bring its current domestic total up to $156.6 million. It also earned another $1.6 million internationally to bring its total international box office up to $273.1 million. So its global box office increased by $2.6 million to bring its current global gross box office revenue up to $429.7 million. Currently, its individual weekly drops have an overall average of 43.38%. So projecting forward by also taking into account the possible average weekly drops that are up to one standard deviation above and below, based on the previous 6 Transformers movies, yields a projected final global gross box office range of $432.1 million to $434.5 million. Given that the movie's estimated break-even point ranges between $500 million to $600 million, which is based on multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, we get a potential range of possible gross box office loss of $65.5 million to $167.9 million. When we divide that range by 2, we get a potential loss for the studios of $32.7 million to $83.9 million, which places Transformers Rise of the Beasts currently into 5th place ahead of Elemental and behind Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, which currently sits in 4th place. This is also the final appearance for Transformers Rise of the Beasts in Who Will Be the Biggest Flop, since its current box office earnings and projected earnings make it impossible to win the coveted Biggest Flop title. It's now time for our 7th and final contestant, which came in 15th place overall in this weekend's domestic box office. So please give a warm welcome to Disney's live-action race-swapped remake of The Little Mermaid. The movie earned another $226,000 at the domestic box office, bringing its current domestic total up to $296.6 million. Internationally, the movie's box office grew by $4.1 million to bring its international total up to $264.5 million. So globally, the movie took in another $5 million, bringing its current global gross box office total up to $561.4 million. Projecting forward using an approximate average weekly drop of 32.02%, the movie's final global gross box office total will probably be around $571.1 million. Next, The Little Mermaid has a break-even point of $780 million, which is calculated by adding the movie's $250 million production budget and the $140 million spent by Disney to market the movie, which yields a total cost of $390 million. That figure then gets multiplied by 2 to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves. So the movie's total global gross box office loss will probably be around $208.8 million. When we divide that by 2, Disney's net loss on The Little Mermaid is currently projected to be around $104.4 million and puts the movie into 5th place. Since it is very likely that The Little Mermaid is going to be leaving the box office very soon, and since its earnings have already made it impossible for it to win the coveted Biggest Flop title, this is also this movie's final appearance in Who Will Be the Biggest Flop. Thus, after another wild week at the box office, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction sits in 1st place, The Flash sits in 2nd place, Haunted Mansion sits in 3rd place, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 sits in 4th place, The Little Mermaid sits in 5th place, Transformers Rise of the Beasts sits in 6th place, and Elemental sits in last place. So be sure to tune in next week for another exciting episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.